A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Chains of Debt. The cramped apartment above Mr. Antonio's bakery had been Sienna Vale's sanctuary for 2 years, but tonight it felt more like a tomb. She pressed her back against the peeling wallpaper, listening to the heavy footsteps echoing up the narrow staircase. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized the deliberate cadence. Collectors didn't hurry. They knew their prey had nowhere to run. At 22, Sienna had learned that survival meant staying invisible. Her father's debts to the supernatural syndicate had followed her like a curse since his death, growing larger with each passing month despite her careful efforts to remain hidden. The bakery owner had been kind enough to let her work for room and board, asking no questions about her past or the way she jumped at sudden sounds. "Miss Vale," a voice called through the thin door, deceptively polite. "We know you're in there. Open up, and we can discuss this like civilized people." Sienna's hands trembled as she backed toward the window. 3 stories up, nothing but concrete below. Even with her lichen healing, that fall would likely kill her. Her wolf stirred restlessly inside her chest, sensing the danger but too weak from months of suppression to offer any real help. The door exploded inward with supernatural force, sending splinters of wood scattering across the threadbare carpet. 2 massive men filled the doorway, their expensive suits doing nothing to hide the predatory grace of their movements. Behind them stood a third figure, smaller, but radiating an authority that made Sienna's instincts scream in warning. "Miss Sienna Vale," the woman said, consulting a leather-bound ledger. "Daughter of Marcus Vale, deceased. Outstanding debt to the Crimson Syndicate. $47,612 plus accumulated interest." Her cold smile revealed unnaturally white teeth. "Payment is now due in full." "I don't have that kind of money," Sienna whispered, her voice barely audible. "I work in a bakery. I make minimum wage. We're aware of your modest circumstances," the woman replied, stepping into the apartment, "which is why we're prepared to offer an alternative form of payment." One of the men produced a rolled parchment from his jacket, the ancient paper crackling as he unrolled it. Even from across the room, Sienna could smell the supernatural binding woven into the fibers. Old magic that would hold stronger than any chain. "A mating contract," the woman explained matter-of-factly. "Your debt will be considered paid in full upon the signing and consummation of a supernatural mating bond with an approved alpha. The syndicate has already identified a suitable candidate who requires a mate for territorial purposes." Sienna's knees nearly buckled. She'd heard whispers of such arrangements, desperate lichens sold into mating contracts to settle gambling debts or territorial disputes. The bonds were binding, permanent, and completely one-sided. The female became property in everything but name. "No," she managed, backing against the window frame. "I won't do it. There has to be another way." "There is no other way," the woman said, her patience clearly wearing thin. "Sign willingly, and you'll be treated with the respect due to an alpha's mate, regardless of the circumstances. Refuse, and we'll drag you to the ceremony in chains. Either way, your debt will be paid." The larger of the 2 men stepped forward, his hand resting casually on what looked like a taser, but hummed with supernatural energy. "Your choice, sweetheart. Easy way or hard way." Sienna's mind raced, searching for an escape that didn't exist. She could try to fight, but 3 supernatural collectors against 1 half-starved lichen weren't odds any sane person would take. She could try to run, but they'd tracked her here after 2 years of careful hiding. They'd find her again within hours. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, slurred with whiskey and regret. "Sometimes, little moon, survival means making choices that break your heart, but you keep breathing, and you keep fighting. And someday you find your way back to the light." "Who?" she asked finally, her voice hollow with defeat. "Who is the Alpha?" The woman consulted her ledger again. "Ezra Voss, Alpha of the Northern Territory. He controls approximately 2,000 square miles of prime timber and mineral rights. The arrangement will be mutually beneficial." Sienna had never heard the name, but something in the woman's tone suggested she should have. The Northern Territory was known for its brutal winters and even more brutal leader. Stories filtered down from the mountains, whispers of a wolf so fierce that rival packs crossed themselves when they spoke his name. "The ceremony will take place tomorrow evening at the syndicate's downtown office," the woman continued. "You'll be provided appropriate attire and transportation. I suggest you use the time to prepare yourself mentally for your new circumstances. And if I try to run, then you'll discover exactly how far our reach extends." The woman's smile turned predatory. "Your new mate has already paid a substantial sum to clear your debt, Miss Vale. He expects delivery of an intact, unmarked female. Don't give us reason to disappoint him." The collectors left as suddenly as they'd arrived, leaving Sienna alone with the destroyed remains of her door and the crushing weight of her future. She sank to the floor, her legs no longer able to support her, and stared at the mating contract they'd left on her small table. The parchment seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Ancient words written in a language she couldn't read but somehow understood. By signing this document, she would become the property of a stranger, bound to him by magic older than civilization. With no hope of escape or annulment, her wolf whimpered deep in her chest, sensing the supernatural chains already beginning to form. Tomorrow night, she would stand before an alpha she'd never met and pledge her life to his service. The debt that had haunted her family for generations would finally be paid, but the cost would be her freedom. Sienna pressed her face to her knees and tried not to think about what kind of man would agree to such an arrangement. What kind of alpha would purchase a mate like cattle, knowing she came to him unwillingly? The stories from the Northern Territory painted a picture of ruthless efficiency and cold brutality, qualities that didn't bode well for a forced bride. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sienna packed her few belongings into a worn duffel bag, her movements mechanical and numb. Everything she owned fit easily into the single bag, a lifetime reduced to spare clothes and a few precious photographs of her parents. As dawn broke over the city, she stood at her broken window and watched the world wake up below. People hurried to work, children walked to school, life continued its normal rhythm while her entire existence crumbled into dust. By tomorrow night, she would be bound to a stranger in the most intimate way possible. Her body, her future, her very soul would belong to an alpha, whose name she'd learned less than 12 hours ago. The freedom she'd fought so hard to preserve would be gone forever, traded away to pay for her father's mistakes. But she would survive. Somehow, she would find a way to endure whatever came next. Her father had taught her that much. Sometimes staying alive was the only victory available. Tomorrow night would bring chains, but it would also bring answers. And perhaps, if she was very clever and very lucky, it might eventually bring a chance for something more. The mating contract lay on her table like a coiled snake, waiting for her signature to seal her fate. In less than 24 hours, she would become the unwilling mate of Ezra Voss, Alpha of the Northern Territory. The only question now was whether she would survive what came after. Chapter 2. Cold Negotiations. The limousine that collected Sienna from the bakery was black as midnight and twice as intimidating. She clutched her duffel bag like a lifeline as the driver, a mountain of a man who smelled distinctly of wolf and violence, held the door open with professional indifference. "Miss Vale," he rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I'm Marcus, Alpha Voss's security chief. He's waiting." The interior of the vehicle was luxurious beyond anything Sienna had ever experienced. Leather seats soft as butter, a minibar stocked with bottles that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and windows tinted so dark the outside world became a blur of shadows. She pressed herself into the corner, trying to make herself as small as possible while her heart hammered against her ribs. The syndicate's downtown office occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower that scraped the belly of storm clouds. As they rode the elevator up, Sienna caught her reflection in the polished steel doors. Pale, thin, dressed in her only decent outfit that still looked shabby compared to the opulence surrounding her. She looked exactly like what she was, a debtor being delivered to pay her father's price. The doors opened onto a reception area that screamed wealth and power. Original artwork lined the walls, and the carpet was so thick it swallowed the sound of their footsteps. Behind an ornate mahogany desk sat the woman from last night, her cold smile unchanged. Miss Vale, she said, without looking up from her paperwork. Right on time. Alpha Voss is waiting in the conference room. They walked down a hallway lined with portraits of stern-faced men, all with the same predatory gleam in their eyes. Each frame bore a small plaque with dates spanning over 2 centuries, the leaders of the Crimson Syndicate, stretching back to the organization's founding. The message was clear. This was an institution with deep roots and longer reach. Marcus stopped before heavy oak doors carved with intricate symbols that hurt to look at directly. "Remember," he said quietly, "show respect. Alpha Voss doesn't appreciate insolence, especially from those who owe him debts." The doors swung open to reveal a conference room that could have hosted a small army. At the far end of a table that stretched for what seemed like miles sat a man who commanded attention simply by existing. Even seated, his size was obvious. Broad shoulders straining against a perfectly tailored black suit. Hands that looked capable of crushing bone resting casually on the polished wood surface. Alpha Ezra Voss was nothing like the monster Sienna had imagined. He was handsome in a harsh, uncompromising way. Sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw covered by precisely trimmed stubble. Dark hair was swept back from his forehead, revealing intelligent eyes the color of storm clouds. But it was the power radiating from him that made her steps falter. This wasn't just an alpha. This was apex predator made flesh. "Sienna Vale," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through her bones. "Sit." It wasn't a request. The alpha command in his tone made her legs move without conscious thought, carrying her to the chair directly across from him. Only when she was seated did she realize how perfectly she'd been positioned. Far enough away to be respectful, close enough for him to study every detail of her appearance. "You look younger than your file suggested," he observed, opening a manila folder. 22, correct?" "Yes, sir." The words came out as barely a whisper. Louder. "I don't have time for mouse squeaking." Heat flooded her cheeks, but she lifted her chin. "Yes, sir. 22. Better." He flipped through several pages, each one presumably containing details of her life that she'd never shared with anyone. "High school dropout, but your test scores indicate above-average intelligence. No criminal record, no known supernatural abilities beyond basic lichen physiology. Father was Marcus Vale, a gambling addict who died owing my associates a considerable sum." Each clinical detail felt like a slap. He was reducing her entire existence to bullet points on a report, cataloging her like inventory he'd purchased. "The contract is straightforward," Ezra continued, producing the same parchment she'd seen the night before. "You will sign this document, creating a binding supernatural marriage between us. In exchange, your family's debt is considered satisfied in full." "What exactly does that mean?" Sienna asked, surprised by her own boldness. "The marriage part?" His storm gray eyes locked onto hers, and she felt the full weight of his attention like a physical force. "It means you belong to me. You'll live on my territory, attend social functions as my mate when required, and maintain the appearance of a functioning relationship. Nothing more complicated than playing a role. And the other aspects?" Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she had to know. "The physical obligations?" Something flickered across his expression. Amusement, maybe, or irritation. "I'm not in the market for a bed warmer, Miss Vale. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. Your virtue, such as it is, will remain intact." The casual dismissal in his tone stung more than it should have. He was making it clear that he found her completely undesirable, suitable only for public appearances, and nothing more intimate. "However," he continued, leaning back in his chair, "there will be rules. You don't leave my territory without permission. You don't speak to media or outsiders about our arrangement. You certainly don't attempt to dissolve the bond or escape. The magic binding us will make such efforts unpleasant. And if I refuse to sign, then Marcus escorts you back to the collectors, and they find less pleasant ways to extract payment from your family's assets. I understand your mother is still alive, residing in a care facility upstate?" Ice flooded Sienna's veins. Her mother's location was supposed to be secret, hidden under layers of false names and cash payments. If the syndicate knew where to find her. "You bastard," she breathed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ezra's eyes went flat and dangerous, and suddenly the civilized businessmen disappeared, replaced by something far more primitive and threatening. "Careful," he said softly. "I'm offering you a comfortable cage instead of a brutal grave. Don't mistake mercy for weakness." For a long moment they stared at each other across the expanse of polished table. Sienna saw no compassion in his face, no hint of the reluctance the syndicate woman had mentioned. Just cold calculation and barely leashed dominance. "Sign the contract, Miss Vale," he said finally. "We both have better things to do than prolong this negotiation." The pen felt impossibly heavy in her hand. Each stroke of her signature bound her more tightly to this stranger, sealing away any hope of freedom or genuine happiness. But her mother was safe in that care facility only as long as the monthly payments continued, and Sienna was the only family she had left. The moment her signature was complete, power crashed over her like a tsunami. Ancient magic carved invisible chains around her heart, binding her soul to the man across the table with supernatural force. She gasped, doubling over as the bond settled into place with hooks of fire and ice. "The ceremony is complete," Ezra said, apparently unaffected by the magical upheaval that had just rearranged her entire existence. "Marcus will escort you to your new home. Pack light. Everything you need will be provided." He stood, straightening his suit jacket with the same casual authority he'd shown throughout their meeting. To him, this was just another business transaction, filed away and forgotten. "Welcome to the Northern Territory, Mrs. Voss," he said, already moving toward the door. "Try not to cause me any trouble." As the conference room doors closed behind him, Sienna remained hunched in her chair, trembling from the aftershocks of the binding. She was married now, bound by magic older than civilization to a man who saw her as nothing more than a useful accessory. The golden band that had appeared on her finger during the ceremony felt like a shackle. When she tried to remove it, pain shot up her arm, the bond's first lesson about the futility of resistance. Marcus cleared his throat respectfully. "Mrs. Voss, we should be going. The Alpha doesn't like to be kept waiting, and you have a long journey ahead." Sienna looked up at him through tear-blurred eyes. "How long?" "The flight to the Northern Territory is about 4 hours," he replied. "But I suspect you're asking about something else. The bond. How long does it last?" His expression softened slightly. The first hint of sympathy she'd seen from anyone connected to this nightmare. "Forever, Mrs. Voss. Supernatural mating bonds don't break. They can only be transferred under very specific circumstances that I wouldn't recommend exploring." "Forever." The word echoed in her mind as Marcus led her to another elevator, another limousine, another step deeper into a life she'd never chosen. She was Sienna Voss now, unwilling mate to the most dangerous Alpha in the Northern Territory. The debt was paid, but the true cost was only beginning to reveal itself. Chapter 3. Gilded Prison. The Northern Territory was nothing like Sienna had imagined. As their helicopter descended through the mountain mist, she pressed her face to the window and stared at an empire carved from wilderness itself. Towering evergreens stretched to every horizon, broken only by the silver thread of rivers and the occasional gleam of a distant lake. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that made her chest tight with unexpected longing. Ezra's compound sat atop a ridge like a fortress, all glass and steel and sharp angles that seemed to challenge the mountains themselves. The main house was massive, easily 10,000 square feet of modern architecture that somehow managed to look both elegant and intimidating. Smaller buildings dotted the property, connected by stone pathways that wound between carefully maintained gardens. "Welcome home," Marcus said as the helicopter touched down on a helipad that offered commanding views of the valley below. "Alpha Voss is waiting in his office. He'll want to establish the ground rules." "Home?" The word felt foreign on her tongue as she gathered her pathetic duffel bag and followed Marcus across the landing pad. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, she caught glimpses of the house's interior. Rich woods, expensive furniture, artwork that probably cost more than most people's cars. This was luxury beyond her wildest dreams, and it belonged to her husband. Her husband. Even thinking the words made her stomach clench with anxiety, and something else she didn't want to examine too closely. Ezra's office occupied the entire top floor of the main house, with windows on 3 sides that offered panoramic views of his territory. He stood with his back to the door when Marcus escorted her in, his hands clasped behind him as he surveyed his domain. He'd changed from the business suit into dark jeans and a cable-knit sweater that did nothing to diminish his imposing presence. "Leave us," he said without turning around. Marcus bowed slightly and withdrew, closing the heavy oak door with a soft click. Suddenly alone with her new husband, Sienna felt very small and very vulnerable in the vast space. "The rules are simple," Ezra began, still not looking at her. "This wing of the house is mine. You don't enter without invitation. The guest quarters have been prepared for you in the east wing. You'll have privacy and comfort, but you stay on the property unless I accompany you." He finally turned, and Sienna was struck again by the sheer intensity of his presence. This close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the small scar along his jawline, the way his sweater stretched across shoulders that looked capable of carrying the world. "There will be social obligations," he continued. "Pack gatherings, territorial meetings, formal dinners. You'll attend as my mate, smile prettily, and say nothing controversial. Think of it as theater. And what's my motivation in this performance?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. His eyebrows rose slightly. "Survival. The Northern Territory has enemies who would love to discover any weakness in my armor. A rebellious mate would be seen as exactly that. So I'm a liability." "You're an asset," he corrected, moving to pour himself a drink from a crystal decanter. "The right kind of mate projects stability, success, domestic harmony. All qualities that strengthen my political position." "The right kind," Sienna repeated. "And what kind would that be?" For the first time since they'd met, something resembling amusement flickered across his features. Biddable. Decorative. Content with her comfortable cage. Heat flashed through her. "I'm none of those things." "No," he agreed, taking a sip of what looked like expensive whiskey. "You're not. Which is why we'll both be earning our keep in this arrangement." He gestured toward a leather folder on his desk. "Your schedule for the next month. Tomorrow night is a welcome dinner with my senior staff. Think of it as your debut. The day after is a territorial meeting with the Southern Packs. Next weekend is the quarterly gathering of Northern Alphas." Sienna opened the folder and stared at page after page of appointments, events, obligations. Her new life laid out in 15-minute increments. Every moment accounted for and managed. "I don't know how to be the wife of an alpha," she said quietly. "I worked in a bakery. I don't know anything about politics or territorial negotiations or—" "You'll learn." His tone brooked no argument. "Maya, my assistant, will help you with wardrobe and protocols. The rest is common sense. Look interested but not too interested. Smile but don't speak unless directly addressed. And never, ever contradict me in public. What if you're wrong about something?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "I'm never wrong about anything that matters." The certainty in his voice was absolute, unshakable. This was a man who'd built an empire on the strength of his convictions, who commanded loyalty through competence and controlled fear. Questioning him wasn't just inadvisable, it was unthinkable. "The staff has been instructed to treat you with the respect due to my mate," Ezra continued, settling behind his massive desk. "In return, you'll treat them with courtesy and consideration. They're not your servants. They're pack members who've earned their positions." "Pack members?" "Everyone who lives and works on this property is part of my pack. We take care of our own, but we expect loyalty in return. Betray that trust, and you'll discover exactly why I control 2,000 square miles of territory without challenge." The casual threat sent ice through her veins, but Sienna forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "I understand." "Do you?" He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those storm-gray eyes. "Because you look like you're already planning your escape. Are you reading my mind?" "I'm reading your body language. The way you keep glancing toward the windows, calculating distances. The way you're holding that bag like you might need to run at any moment." His lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Relax, Sienna. Even if you could somehow make it off the property, the bond would drag you back. Magic is more reliable than locks." As if summoned by his words, the golden band on her finger pulsed with warm energy. The sensation traveled up her arm and settled around her heart like invisible chains, reminding her that she belonged to this man whether she wanted to or not. "Maya will show you to your quarters," Ezra said, already turning his attention to paperwork. "Dinner is at 7. Don't be late." Dismissed like a child, Sienna gathered what remained of her dignity and headed for the door. But his voice stopped her before she could leave. "Sienna." She turned back, surprised by the use of her first name. "This doesn't have to be a punishment," he said quietly. "You can find happiness here if you let yourself." The unexpected gentleness in his tone caught her off guard. For just a moment, the mask of cold authority slipped, revealing something that might have been understanding. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar wall of professional distance. Maya turned out to be a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, and the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who'd spent decades managing the chaos that surrounded powerful men. She led Sienna through corridors lined with original artwork and Persian rugs, past rooms that could have graced the pages of architectural magazines. "The Alpha means well," Maya said as they walked, apparently reading Sienna's shell-shocked expression. "He's not cruel, just focused. The responsibilities of leadership don't leave much room for softness." "How long have you worked for him?" 15 years, since shortly after he took over the territory. He was very young then, barely 25, and the other packs thought they could push him around." Maya's smile was fierce with pride. "They learned better quickly enough." The guest quarters turned out to be a suite that was larger and more luxurious than any apartment Sienna had ever lived in. A sitting room with a stone fireplace, a bedroom with a king-sized bed that could have slept 4 people comfortably, and a bathroom with a tub deep enough to swim in. French doors opened onto a private balcony that overlooked the gardens and the valley beyond. "Your wardrobe has been prepared," Maya said, opening closet doors to reveal dozens of dresses, suits, casual clothes, and formal gowns. "Everything in your size, selected to complement your coloring. The jewelry is in the bedroom safe. The combination is your birthday." Sienna stared at the wealth of options, each piece clearly expensive and perfectly coordinated. "How did you know my size?" "My birthday?" "The Alpha is very thorough when he wants something." Maya's tone suggested this was a massive understatement. "He's had people researching you for weeks, ever since the syndicate first approached him about the arrangement." "Weeks?" "Oh yes. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. Alpha Voss doesn't do anything without extensive planning." Maya smoothed an invisible wrinkle from one of the gowns. "He chose you very specifically, Mrs. Voss. I think you'll find that flattering once you understand what it means." After Maya left, Sienna stood alone in her beautiful prison, trying to process everything that had happened. Less than 48 hours ago, she'd been hiding in a cramped apartment above a bakery. Now she was the wife of one of the most powerful alphas in North America, living in luxury she couldn't have imagined, bound by magic to a man who saw her as a political asset. She walked out onto the balcony and breathed in air that smelled of pine and snow and something wild that made her wolf stir restlessly. The view was breathtaking, mountains stretching to the horizon, forests thick with mystery, streams that caught the afternoon sunlight like scattered diamonds. It was beautiful. It was also a cage, no matter how gilded the bars. The bond pulsed gently around her heart, a constant reminder of her new reality. She was Ezra Voss's mate now, whether she'd chosen it or not. The question was whether she could find a way to make this life bearable, or if she'd spend the rest of her days fighting invisible chains that would never break. Tomorrow would bring her first test, dinner with Ezra's senior staff, her debut as the Alpha's wife. She had less than 24 hours to transform herself from a frightened bakery worker into someone who could convincingly play the role of a powerful man's chosen partner. The golden band on her finger caught the sunlight, winking like a promise or a threat. She was Sienna Voss now, and there was no going back. The only question was what kind of woman she would become in this new life. Victim or survivor, pawn or player. One way or another, she was going to find out. Chapter 4. Hearts Under Siege. The formal dining room sparkled with polite laughter and clinking crystal, but tension wove beneath each word. Sienna sat at Ezra's right hand, her fingers curled nervously on her lap, feeling the scrutiny of every pair of eyes trained upon her. The air was thick with politics and hierarchy. Ezra presided with his usual command, but tonight the pack felt unsettled. David Brooks, chief financial officer, raised his glass in Sienna's honor. "Welcome, Mrs. Voss. May your presence bring peace to our pack." Sienna smiled, giving the proper reply. but caught a predatory glint from a younger beta sitting across the table. "You wear North's colors well," he said, voice silk wrapped around steel. "Unusual elegance for a Luna." The compliment was pointed, bordering the edge of propriety. Ezra's hand found Sienna's beneath the table. Grip iron, protective, territorial. Sarah Martinez, pack relations, exchanged loaded glances with James Walker, chief of security. Connor Hale's provocations have increased. Another courier tried leaving a box at the gates today. Ezra's attention sharpened, his jaw hardening. Connor's behavior was escalating, and everyone felt it. Sienna remembered Maya's warning earlier. Trust the council, but trust Ezra more. A challenge is coming. The beta's attention lingered. A Luna with eyes like storm clouds. I'd risk exile for a dance. Ezra's response was a low, vibrating growl. The dinner fell silent. "You'll risk more than exile if you challenge my boundaries tonight," Ezra replied, voice sharp as a razor. Sienna felt a tremor run through her. Every member present recognized the display, a warning that the Alpha was fiercely protective, and that lines must not be crossed. Dinner shifted to territory business, tense discussions on borders and resources. Sienna listened intently, absorbing how Ezra negotiated, never yielding, always 2 moves ahead. She was proud, and suddenly fearful. His enemies saw not just her vulnerability, but hers as an opening in Ezra's armor. Later, after dinner, the pack withdrew, leaving Sienna alone in the grand hallway. She wandered, the house quiet but not restful, haunted by the knowledge that Connor Hale wanted more than just a territorial victory. He wanted the Luna herself. Ezra found her near the balcony. "Security's doubled," he muttered, scanning the grounds. "But stay inside tonight." His voice carried weight, but softer now. A plea, not a command. Sienna nodded, but unease grew. She watched Ezra move through the halls, speaking to James, conferring with Sarah. Everyone was preparing for something bigger. The sense of looming danger was palpable. That danger struck faster than anyone expected. Near midnight, alarms shattered the quiet. Sienna froze in her suite, heart hammering as shouts and footsteps thundered in the corridors. She stepped into the hallway, met panic, Maya hurrying staff into safe rooms, security wolves rushing past. James appeared, face grim. "Stay with Maya. Ezra's gone to the East Wing. We have intruders." But Sienna's wolf pulsed with anxiety. Instinct drove her to find Ezra. She ran down marble stairs, ignoring Maya's protests. Glass shattered somewhere close. Through the moonlit atrium, she glimpsed shadows. 3 attackers, lichens masked and vicious, moving with lethal intent toward the private study. Ezra appeared from nowhere, a force of nature in motion. He collided with the first assailant, claws flashing. The struggle was brutal, turning the polished floor into a battleground. The second attacker lunged at Sienna, but Ezra intercepted, taking the full force of claws raking across his back. Blood blossomed on his shirt, pain etched in every muscle. More security arrived, pack wolves joining the fray. James grappled the third adversary, but not before Sienna saw Ezra falter, clutching his wounded side. The attackers retreated as reinforcements surged, but the damage was done. Ezra bled heavily, swaying as James barked orders to chase down escapees. Sienna rushed to Ezra, adrenaline and fear overpowering protocol or rank. She wrapped his arm around her shoulders, half carrying, half dragging him to his private rooms. He tried to push her away, muttering protests, but she refused to yield. Inside, she lowered him to the bed as Maya swept in to help, setting out towels, warm water, antiseptic. Staff lingered, worry painting their faces. "Go," Sienna ordered softly, surprising herself with the authority in her voice. Maya nodded, and the door closed. In the quiet, Sienna knelt at Ezra's side, unbuttoning his torn shirt. Blood flowed freely from deep gouges. She bit back tears and set to work. For long minutes she cleaned each wound, her hands steady, mind racing with dread. "Why did you do it?" she asked finally, breaking the taut silence. "Why risk everything for me? I thought I was just a contract." Ezra's face twisted, Not in pain, but in conflict. It wasn't supposed to matter, he said hoarsely. You weren't supposed to matter. But you do. Sienna's voice cracked. She pressed the cloth to another wound, feeling her wolf tremble inside her. So why, Ezra? Tell me. He closed his eyes, voice rough and low. Because you remind me what it is to feel, to want something that isn't power, and I can't afford that. Not again. She stopped, searching his face for meaning. Because of her? Leanna. He nodded, jaw clenched hard. Connor attacked when I was negotiating. I thought I could handle everything. Business, war, protection. She died because I hesitated. I swore I'd never love again. Never let anyone close enough to break me. Sienna dropped the bloodied towel on the floor. Her own wounds, emotional, aching. And now, she whispered. His eyes opened, stormy gray and full of agony. Now I'm breaking, Sienna. You're tearing every wall down. I thought the bond would be a cage, but you make it something else. Sienna pressed his hand against her cheek, tears slipping down. I won't break, Ezra. I'm not her, and I'm not leaving. He flinched, fear naked on his face. If I lose you too, I won't survive it. She moved closer. Then stop pushing me away. I'll fight for you if you'll let me. Something in him finally snapped. He drew her into a desperate embrace, lips finding hers in a kiss both fierce and fragile, full of years of buried pain and hope. The bond between them pulsed, not as chain, but lifeline. They separated, foreheads pressed together, breathing rough. If something happens to you because of me, Ezra whispered, I'd rather die first. Sienna lay beside him, hands gentle, touch grounding. Nothing will happen. We'll face whatever comes, together. Silence carried comfort and promise. Sienna felt her own fears surface. With voice barely audible, she confessed, Sometimes I'm afraid I'm not enough, that I'm only here because of what you lost. Ezra touched her face, eyes soft but fierce. You mean everything. You're my future, not my replacement. Night deepened as exhaustion claimed them both. Sienna drifted to sleep in his arms, wounds forgotten, walls forgotten, hearts revealed. Ezra held her close, breathing words she barely heard. You matter more than anything, more than everything. Before dawn, pack security swept the grounds and Maya brought fresh bandages. Sienna woke still wrapped in Ezra's embrace, feeling, maybe for the first time, truly safe. In the distance, territory challenges brewed, but here, a new bond was forging, stronger and more alive with every shared heartbeat. Their love, born of pain and threat, began its slow transformation, not an escape from danger, but the promise they would face it, together. Chapter 5. Shattered Illusions. 3 weeks had passed since the dinner party, and Sienna was beginning to find her rhythm in the Northern Territory. The morning sunlight streamed through her bedroom windows as she prepared for another day of what Maya diplomatically called alpha wife training, etiquette lessons, pack politics tutorials, and endless wardrobe consultations for upcoming social events. She was reviewing seating charts for the quarterly alpha gathering when Maya knocked on her door. Her usually composed expression troubled. Mrs. Voss? There's someone here to see you. She says she's an old friend of your father's. Sienna's blood chilled. Very few people knew where she was, and fewer still would have been able to get past Ezra's security. Did she give a name? Rebecca Thorne. She's waiting in the blue sitting room. The name meant nothing to Sienna, but something about Maya's tone suggested this wasn't a social call. She made her way downstairs, her footsteps echoing in the vast corridors, and found a woman in her 50s waiting by the windows. She was elegantly dressed but nervous, her hands twisting a leather purse as she stared out at the gardens. Mrs. Thorne? Sienna said quietly. You wanted to see me? The woman turned, and Sienna was struck by the sadness in her eyes. My God, you look just like your mother did at your age. I'm Rebecca. I knew your parents before everything went wrong. I'm sorry, but I don't remember you. You wouldn't. You were very young when I last saw you. Rebecca's smile was painful. I worked for the syndicate in those days, handling debt collections. I tried to help your father find alternative arrangements, but he was Stubborn. Sienna's chest tightened. Why are you here? Rebecca glanced toward the door, then moved closer, lowering her voice. Because you need to know the truth about your marriage, child. About what your husband really intends. What do you mean? The arrangement between Alpha Voss and the syndicate isn't what you think. Rebecca pulled a manila envelope from her purse. These are copies of the original negotiations, the real contracts. Your husband never intended to keep you permanently. Sienna's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside were official documents, letters bearing Ezra's signature, negotiation transcripts that made her blood turn to ice, temporary arrangement, pending resolution of territorial disputes. She read aloud, her voice hollow. Upon successful consolidation of Southern Pack alliances, the female will be returned to syndicate custody for reassignment. He planned to use you for 6 months, maybe a year, Rebecca said gently. Long enough to stabilize his political position. Then he intended to send you back. Let the syndicate arrange another placement for you. The papers fluttered to the floor as Sienna sank into the nearest chair. Every kiss, every gentle touch, every moment of supposed connection. It had all been an elaborate performance. Ezra had never intended to keep her. She was just a temporary political prop, useful only until he no longer needed the stability that a mate provided. Why are you telling me this? She whispered. Because I've seen too many young women destroyed by these arrangements. Your father died believing his debt would be forgiven, that you'd be safe and cared for. He never knew the whole truth. Rebecca's voice cracked. I couldn't save him, but maybe I can save you. Save me how? The bond can be transferred under specific circumstances. If your current mate voluntarily relinquishes his claim, another Alpha can take over the contract. Rebecca pulled out another document. Alpha Connor Hale of the Southern Packs has made an offer. He's willing to assume your debt in exchange for a permanent mating bond. Connor Hale, the Alpha that Ezra's staff had mentioned, the one who'd been causing territorial problems. Sienna's mind reeled. You're working for him. I'm working for you, Rebecca insisted. Connor may not be perfect, but he's offering you something Ezra never will. A real marriage, a genuine partnership. He's seen your photograph, read your background. He wants you for yourself, not as a political convenience. Sienna stared at the documents scattered on the floor, her whole world tilting sideways. Everything she'd begun to feel for Ezra. Every moment of hope that their arrangement might become something real. It had all been built on lies. Think about it, Rebecca said softly, but don't take too long. Connor's offer has an expiration date, and once Ezra no longer needs you for political cover, your options will become much more limited. After Rebecca left, Sienna sat alone in the sitting room, staring at the evidence of her husband's deception. The golden band on her finger felt heavier now, less like a promise, and more like the chain it had always been. The sound of footsteps in the corridor made her hastily gather the papers. Maya appeared in the doorway, her expression curious. Is everything all right, Mrs. Voss? You look pale. Fine, Sienna managed. Just tired. But as the day wore on, she couldn't stop thinking about Rebecca's revelations. She found herself studying Ezra differently when he returned from his afternoon meetings, looking for signs of the deception she now knew lay beneath his careful courtesy. How was your day? He asked over dinner, the question casual, but his attention focused entirely on her. Educational, she replied, testing the word. I learned some interesting things about pack politics. Oh, such as? How temporary alliances work. How alphas use marriage for political advantage. She watched his face carefully. How easy it is to renegotiate contracts when they're no longer useful. Something flickered in Ezra's expression. Surprise, maybe, or wariness. That's a rather cynical view of pack relationships. Is it? Sienna set down her fork, her appetite gone. Maya says you're very thorough when you want something. That you don't make decisions without extensive planning. That's true. So, when you chose me, you'd already planned exactly how long you'd need me, hadn't you? The silence that followed was deafening. Ezra's jaw tightened, his storm-gray eyes searching her face with sudden intensity. What brought this on? He asked quietly. Just curious about my future. About whether I have one here, or if I'm just marking time until you're done with me. Sienna, don't. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Don't lie to me anymore. I've had enough lies to last a lifetime. She fled to her quarters before he could respond, her heart hammering against her ribs. The confrontation hadn't provided the answers she'd hoped for, but his reaction had told her everything she needed to know. Rebecca had been telling the truth. The knock on her door came an hour later, soft but insistent. Go away, she called. We need to talk. Ezra's voice was quiet but implacable. I think we've talked enough. Sienna. The alpha command in his tone made her feet move without conscious thought, carrying her to the door despite her better judgment. He stood in the hallway still dressed in his business attire, but his usually perfect appearance was disheveled. His dark hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it, and his tie hung loose around his neck. Let me explain, he said. Explain what? That you planned to discard me once I'd served my purpose? That every kind word, every gentle touch was just you playing a role? It's not that simple, isn't it? Sienna laughed bitterly. You negotiated a temporary arrangement, Ezra. You planned to use me and then send me away. What part of that isn't simple? His face went very still. Who told you about the original contracts? Does it matter? The point is, I know this has all been an elaborate charade. You don't know everything. Then tell me. The words came out as a challenge. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you never planned to send me back to the syndicate. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Ezra's hands clenched at his sides, his internal struggle visible in every line of his body. I can't, he said finally. The admission hit her like a physical blow. Even knowing it was coming, hearing him confirm her worst fears made her knees weak. But the situation has changed, he continued quickly. What started as political necessity has become... Stop. Sienna held up a hand. Just stop. I don't want to hear about how your feelings have evolved or how the arrangement might be modified. You made a contract to use me temporarily, and that's exactly what you've been doing. Sienna, please. I need time to think. She stepped back from the door. About my options. About what I want my future to look like. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by something that looked like fear. What options? The kind that don't involve being treated like a disposable asset. She met his gaze steadily. Good night, Ezra. She closed the door before he could respond, then leaned against it as her legs finally gave out. The sound of his footsteps retreating down the corridor was like a death knell for the foolish dreams she'd begun to nurture. Connor Hale's offer lay on her dresser, the papers seeming to pulse with possibility. Another alpha, another arrangement, but this time with a man who claimed to want her permanently, who promised a genuine partnership instead of temporary convenience. The bond around her heart ached as she considered her choices. Stay with a man who saw her as a useful tool, or transfer to one who might actually value her as a person. Neither option was ideal, but one offered hope, while the other promised only eventual abandonment. She had until morning to decide. By dawn, she would either accept her fate as Ezra's temporary mate, or take the terrifying leap into an unknown future with Connor Hale. The golden band on her finger caught the lamplight, and for the first time since the ceremony, Sienna wondered if she had the courage to find out what lay beyond her beautiful prison. The choice was hers to make. She just hoped she was strong enough to live with the consequences. Chapter 6. Blood and Fury. The letter was waiting on Sienna's pillow when she returned from her restless walk through the gardens. Her hands trembled as she broke the unfamiliar wax seal, her heart hammering as she recognized the bold handwriting inside. My dear Sienna, it began. By now you know the truth about your current arrangement. I offer you something Ezra Voss never will. Genuine partnership, respect, and a permanent place at my side. If you're ready to claim the life you deserve, meet me at the old mill at midnight. Come alone, and I'll show you what real devotion looks like. Connor Hale. She stared at the words until they blurred, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears. Connor was here, in Ezra's territory, close enough to slip past security and leave messages in her private quarters. The boldness of it was both terrifying and strangely compelling. A knock at her door made her jump. Come in, she called, hastily folding the letter. Maya entered with a tea service, her expression troubled. Mrs. Voss, Alpha Voss would like to see you in his study. He seemed urgent. Sienna's pulse quickened. Had Ezra discovered Connor's presence? Did he know about the midnight meeting? Did he say what about? Security concerns. Something about increased patrols along the southern border. Maya set down the tray with careful precision. He's been on edge all evening. The whole staff can feel it. The study felt different when Sienna entered, charged with tension that made her skin prickle. Ezra stood at the windows with his back to her, his shoulders rigid beneath his dark sweater. James Walker was there too, along with 2 other security personnel she didn't recognize. Sienna, Ezra said without turning around. We have a problem. What kind of problem? Connor Hale crossed into our territory this afternoon with a small contingent of his wolves. My scouts report they're camped about 5 miles south of here. He finally faced her, his storm-gray eyes blazing with controlled fury. Any idea what he might want? The letter in her pocket felt like it was burning against her skin. How would I know? Because his interest in my territory began shortly after our mating ceremony. Because he's been asking questions about you specifically. Ezra moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the confined space. Because men like Connor don't take unnecessary risks unless they think they can win something valuable. Are you suggesting this is my fault? I'm suggesting you tell me if you've had any contact with him. The direct question hung in the air like a challenge. Sienna felt the weight of every gaze in the room, the expectation that she would confess whatever conspiracy they imagined she was part of. No, she said firmly. I've never spoken to Connor Hale in my life. It wasn't technically a lie. She hadn't spoken to him. But the letter in her pocket made her feel like a fraud, a traitor caught in the act of betrayal. James, Ezra said, not taking his eyes off Sienna. Double the perimeter guards. I want to know if so much as a rabbit crosses our borders without authorization. Already done, Alpha. But if Hale's planning something, he'll likely move tonight. Full moon gives him maximum strength for his wolves. Full moon. Sienna's heart sank as she realized the significance. Connor hadn't chosen the timing randomly. He was planning to strike when his pack would be at their most powerful. What do you think he wants? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. You, Ezra said bluntly. He wants to prove he can take what's mine, that I can't protect my own mate. If he succeeds, it damages my reputation irreparably. The casual way he referred to her as a possession made something twist in her chest. Even now, facing a potential invasion of his territory, Ezra saw her primarily as an asset to be protected, rather than a person to be cherished. Sir, one of the security team interrupted. We're getting reports of movement along the eastern perimeter. Looks like a diversionary tactic. Ezra's jaw tightened. He's trying to split our forces. James, take half the men and secure the main house. I'll handle the perimeter with the rest. Alpha, James said carefully, maybe you should stay with Mrs. Voss. If this is about her, this is about territory and respect. Ezra cut him off. I won't cower in my own home while some upstart tries to steal what belongs to me. As the men filed out to take their positions, Ezra turned back to Sienna. The mask of cold authority had slipped slightly, revealing the man underneath. Worried, protective, and trying desperately to maintain control of a situation that was spiraling beyond his grasp. Whatever happens tonight, he said quietly, stay in the house. Don't go outside for any reason. Ezra, promise me. His hands gripped her shoulders, his intensity almost frightening. Promise me you won't do anything foolish. The irony wasn't lost on her. He was asking for her promise while planning to abandon her himself, expecting loyalty he'd never intended to return. But looking into his eyes, seeing genuine fear for her safety, she found herself nodding. I promise, she whispered. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, as if trying to claim her one last time before whatever was coming tore them apart. When he pulled away, his breathing was ragged. I meant what I said the other night, he said roughly, about the situation changing, about what you've come to mean to me. Ezra. But he was already gone, leaving her alone with the taste of his kiss and the weight of Connor's letter in her pocket. The house fell into an eerie quiet after the security teams deployed. Sienna paced her quarters, torn between loyalty to the man who'd shown her unexpected kindness and resentment toward the one who'd planned to discard her. The letter called to her, promising freedom from the lies and half-truths that had defined her marriage. At 11:30, she made her decision. The old mill sat in a clearing about a mile from the main house, accessible by a hiking trail that wound through dense forest. Sienna had discovered it during her explorations of the property, drawn by its rustic charm and peaceful isolation. Now it felt ominous in the moonlight, shadows dancing between the ancient machinery. Connor Hale was waiting by the water wheel, exactly as his letter had promised. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with the kind of rugged handsomeness that belonged in adventure movies. His smile was warm and welcoming as she approached, a stark contrast to Ezra's controlled intensity. "Sienna," he said, opening his arms. "You came. I needed answers," she replied, staying out of reach. "Rebecca Thorne showed me documents about the original arrangement." His expression grew serious. "I was hoping she'd reach you in time. Ezra Voss has played you for a fool, sweet girl. Used you for political gain while planning to discard you the moment you were no longer useful. And you're different? I'm offering you permanence, real partnership. A chance to be valued for who you are instead of what you represent." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "I've been watching you, Sienna. I know your strength, your loyalty, your fierce heart. You deserve so much more than Voss is willing to give." The words were everything she'd longed to hear, but something felt wrong. Connor's smile was too practiced, his words too smooth. He sounded like a man delivering a well-rehearsed sales pitch, rather than speaking from genuine emotion. "How do I know you're not just offering me another contract?" she asked. "Because I'm offering you choice." He pulled out a folded document. "Transfer papers. Sign this, and I'll challenge Voss's claim before the pack councils. You'll be free to choose your own mate, your own future." Sienna reached for the papers, her heart pounding. Freedom. Real freedom. Not just a transfer from one cage to another. The possibility was intoxicating. But as her fingers touched the document, Connor's grip tightened, his smile turning predatory. "Of course," he said conversationally, "that choice will be somewhat limited by circumstances. My pack needs a Luna, and you need protection. It's really the only logical arrangement." Ice flooded her veins. "Let go of me." "Oh, I don't think so. You see, this was never about rescuing you from Voss. This is about taking something that belongs to him, proving that he can't protect what's his." Connor's facade dropped completely, revealing the calculating predator underneath. "You're just the weapon I'm using to destroy his reputation." Sienna tried to pull away, but his grip was iron strong. Her wolf stirred uneasily, sensing the danger but still too weak to offer real help. "Voss thinks he's so clever, building his little empire through careful negotiation and political maneuvering," Connor continued. "But he's forgotten the most important rule. Strength is the only currency that matters. When I claim his mate in front of witnesses, every alpha in the region will see his weakness." "You're insane," Sienna breathed. "I'm practical and patient. I've been planning this for months, waiting for the right opportunity." His free hand moved to her throat, not quite threatening, but unmistakably possessive. "Rebecca played her part perfectly, didn't she? Fed you just enough truth to make you angry, then guided you right into my hands." The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. Rebecca, Connor, even her own desperate need for answers. It had all been orchestrated to bring her to this moment. "Ezra will kill you," she said quietly. "Ezra will try. But he's alone, and I have 20 wolves waiting in the forest. Even if he survives the fight, his reputation will be destroyed. No alpha can recover from failing to protect his mate." The sound of approaching footsteps made them both freeze. Through the trees, Sienna could see lights moving. Flashlights or torches carried by searchers. Connor cursed under his breath. "He's early. No matter. We'll finish this here." He dragged her toward the mill's entrance, but Sienna had no intention of going quietly. She drove her elbow into his ribs with all her strength, earning a grunt of pain and a momentary loosening of his grip. It was enough. She twisted free and ran toward the approaching lights. "Ezra!" she screamed. "It's a trap!" Connor's roar of fury echoed behind her, followed by the sound of bones cracking as he shifted into his wolf form. But she was already stumbling into the clearing where Ezra emerged from the tree line, his eyes blazing with inhuman fury. "Get behind me," he ordered, not taking his gaze off the massive gray wolf that burst from the mill's shadows. But even as Sienna obeyed, she could see they were outnumbered. More wolves melted from the forest, Connor's pack, surrounding them with deadly intent. Ezra was strong, but he was only one man against 20 supernatural predators. The battle was about to begin, and Sienna realized with sick certainty that she'd just doomed the only man who'd ever shown her genuine kindness. Her choice had led them both into a trap that might destroy everything. Chapter 7. The Alpha's Truth. The transformation that overtook Ezra was unlike anything Sienna had ever witnessed. His shift wasn't the controlled change she'd seen from other lichens. It was a cataclysmic explosion of fury made flesh. Bones cracked and reformed with sounds like gunshots. Muscles expanded beyond natural limits. When the change completed, the creature that stood before Connor's pack was less wolf than primordial force of nature. Ezra's wolf form was massive, easily twice the size of Connor's gray beast. His midnight black fur seemed to absorb the moonlight, and his eyes blazed with an inner fire that spoke of something far more dangerous than simple animal rage. This was an alpha pushed beyond his breaking point, a predator whose mate had been threatened. Connor's wolves hesitated, their earlier confidence wavering in the face of this supernatural fury. But their alpha snarled a command, and they surged forward as one. What followed was carnage. Ezra moved through the attacking pack like death incarnate. His claws tore through flesh and bone with terrifying ease. His jaws closed around throats, silencing snarls forever. Blood painted the clearing crimson as wolf after wolf fell to his relentless assault. Sienna pressed herself against a tree, watching in horrified fascination as her husband demonstrated exactly why he controlled the Northern Territory unopposed. This wasn't just strength. It was dominance so absolute that it redefined the word itself. Connor tried to coordinate his pack's attacks, but Ezra was everywhere at once. A shadow with teeth, a nightmare with claws. Within minutes, half the invading wolves lay motionless in the bloodied grass. The survivors began backing away, their courage failing in the face of such overwhelming violence. "Cowards!" Connor snarled, his wolf form larger than his followers but still dwarfed by Ezra's supernatural size. "He's just one wolf!" But even as he spoke, Connor's own certainty was cracking. He'd planned this confrontation assuming Ezra was like other alphas, powerful but limited by natural law. What faced him now transcended such mundane restrictions. Ezra's response was a roar that shook leaves from the surrounding trees. The sound carried notes of pure alpha dominance that made every wolf within hearing distance instinctively submit. Several of Connor's remaining followers actually whimpered, dropping to their bellies in involuntary surrender. "You want her?" Ezra's voice was barely recognizable, distorted by fury and transformation. "Come and take her." Connor lunged, his gray form a blur of desperate aggression. But Ezra was ready. They collided in the center of the clearing with an impact that cracked the ancient stones of the mill's foundation. For a moment, they were a whirlwind of snapping jaws and raking claws, too fast for Sienna to follow. Then Connor's agonized howl split the night. Ezra had him pinned, one massive paw pressing the gray wolf's muzzle into the bloody earth, while his other paw hovered over Connor's exposed throat. "Submit," Ezra commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Never," Connor gasped. "I'll never—" The words cut off as Ezra's claws found their mark. Connor's struggles weakened, then ceased entirely. The gray wolf's eyes dimmed as life fled his powerful form, leaving only another corpse in the field of Ezra's wrath. The remaining wolves fled without waiting for dismissal, their terrified howls echoing through the forest as they abandoned their dead alpha and scattered to the winds. Within moments, the clearing was silent, except for Sienna's ragged breathing and the sound of Ezra's labored pants. He stood among the carnage he'd created, his massive form swaying with exhaustion. Blood matted his dark fur, some his own, most belonging to his enemies. But even wounded, even pushed beyond his limits, he radiated power that made the air itself tremble. Slowly, carefully, Sienna approached him. Ezra. His great head turned toward her, and she saw recognition flicker in those burning eyes. But she also saw something else. Pain that went deeper than physical injury. The shift back to human form was agonizing to witness. Each bone that reformed sent shudders through his frame. When it finally ended, Ezra collapsed to his knees, naked and bloodied, but unmistakably human once more. "Are you hurt?" Sienna dropped beside him, her hands hovering over the worst of his wounds. Claw marks raked his chest, and a deep bite on his shoulder leaked crimson onto the torn earth. "I'll heal," he managed, though his voice was rough with pain. "But why did you come here?" "I told you to stay in the house." The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Sienna realized he knew. Somehow he'd figured out that she'd come here willingly, that Connor hadn't simply kidnapped her from the safety of the compound. "I received a letter," she said quietly, "from Connor. He promised me answers, freedom from the lies." Ezra's jaw tightened. "And you believed him?" "I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe someone saw value in me beyond political convenience." She looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "I know about the original contract, Ezra. I know you planned to send me away." The silence stretched so long she wondered if he would respond at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes. Originally, that was the plan." The admission hit her like a physical blow, even though she'd already known the truth. Hearing him confirm it made something crack inside her chest. "But that changed," he continued, struggling to sit up despite his injuries. "It changed the first night you had dinner with my staff. Do you remember what you said to David when he mentioned the timber contracts?" Sienna frowned, trying to recall the conversation. "I said it seemed wasteful to clear-cut the old growth forest when selective harvesting would be more sustainable long-term. A comment that saved me $12 million and preserved irreplaceable wilderness." His storm-gray eyes found hers. "You saw possibilities my advisors missed. Solutions that balanced profit with responsibility. You made me a better leader." "So you decided to keep me because I'm useful?" "I decided to keep you because I was falling in love with you." The words fell between them like stones into still water. "Because somewhere between your quiet strength and your fierce loyalty, I lost track of where the arrangement ended and my feelings began." Sienna's breath caught. "Love? Terrifying, isn't it?" His laugh was bitter. "I spent 15 years building walls around my heart, convincing myself that emotions were weaknesses enemies could exploit. Then you walked into my life and showed me what I'd been missing. But you never said, how could I? You were bound to me by contract, not choice. What would you have thought if I'd declared my feelings while you were legally obligated to accept them?" He reached for her hand, his fingers gentle despite the blood caked under his nails. "I wanted you to choose me freely, Sienna. Not because magic compelled you or debt trapped you, but because you wanted to be mine." The truth of his words resonated through her, making sense of behaviors she'd misunderstood. His careful distance hadn't been indifference. It had been respect for her autonomy. His refusal to pressure her physically hadn't been rejection. It had been patience. "I was going to tear up the original contract," he continued. "After the Alpha Gathering next week, I plan to formally renounce any claim the Syndicate had on you, make you legally free to choose your own future. Even if I chose to leave, even then." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "Love without choice isn't love at all. It's just a prettier kind of slavery." Tears stung her eyes as the full scope of his sacrifice became clear. He'd been willing to risk losing her entirely to ensure her freedom, the very opposite of what Connor had represented. Another cage disguised as liberation. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry I doubted you. Sorry I walked into Connor's trap. You had every right to doubt me. I gave you contracts and conditions instead of honesty. I was so afraid of becoming my father, weak, vulnerable to manipulation, that I nearly lost the only thing that mattered. Your father fell in love with a human woman who was working for his enemies. They used her to learn our security protocols, our weaknesses. When they attacked, she died in the crossfire, caught between the love that made him vulnerable and the enemies it attracted." His voice grew distant with memory. I swore I'd never make his mistake. I'd never let emotion compromise my judgment. But you came for me tonight, alone, outnumbered, knowing it was probably a trap, because I realized something important while I was standing in that empty house, knowing you were gone. His eyes met hers with devastating intensity. I'd rather die protecting someone I love than live safely without them. The bond between them pulsed with sudden warmth, responding to the truth in his words. For the first time since signing that cursed contract, Sienna felt it not as chains but as connection. A bridge between two hearts that had found each other against all odds. I choose you, she said quietly, not because of contracts or debts or magical compulsion, because you're the man who carried me up a mountain when I was too weak to walk, because you respected my choices even when they hurt you, because you fought 20 wolves to save me tonight. Sienna, I love you, Ezra Voss. The words felt like a revelation, a truth she'd been afraid to acknowledge even to herself. I love your strength and your gentleness. I love how you lead with wisdom instead of fear. I love that you saw value in a baker's assistant with no prospects and nothing to offer but loyalty. His kiss was soft, reverent, tasting of blood and promises. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. Their breathing mingled in the space between. The moon goddess watches over fools and lovers, he murmured against her lips. Sometimes I think she enjoys making us work for our happiness. As if summoned by his words, silver light began to gather around them. Not moonlight, but something far more ancient and powerful. The air shimmered with divine presence as the goddess herself chose to bless their union. Sienna gasped as warmth flooded through her, healing not just Ezra's wounds, but the spiritual damage their doubts had caused. The bond between them blazed with renewed strength. No longer a chain, but a lifeline connecting two souls that had finally chosen each other freely. When the light faded, Ezra's injuries were gone. His skin bore no trace of the battle's violence, healed by divine intervention and the power of their true mating bond. Now we begin again, he said, helping her to her feet. No contracts, no arrangements, just two people who chose love over fear. As they walked back toward the house together, Sienna felt the last of her doubts fall away. She was exactly where she belonged, with the man who'd proven that love was worth fighting for. Their real story was just beginning. Chapter 8. Forever claimed 6 months later. The morning sun painted the northern territory in shades of gold and emerald, transforming the vast wilderness into something magical. Sienna stood on the balcony of the master suite, their suite now, officially and completely, watching Ezra address his expanded council in the courtyard below. His voice carried clearly in the crisp mountain air, confident and commanding as he discussed trade agreements with the Eastern Pax. So much had changed since that bloody night at the old mill. The territory had grown by nearly 30%, as smaller packs sought the protection of Ezra's leadership. What had once been a collection of loosely affiliated groups was now a true confederation, bound together by mutual respect and shared prosperity. And at the center of it all stood the Alpha, who had chosen love over fear, vulnerability over invulnerability. You're brooding again, Maya observed, entering with the morning tea service. Her smile was knowing, affectionate, the expression of someone who'd watched two stubborn people fall in love despite themselves. I'm not brooding, Sienna protested. I'm contemplating. And what deep thoughts occupy the Luna's mind this morning? Luna. The title still sent warmth through her chest, though it had been months since the pack formally acknowledged her as Ezra's true mate. Not the contracted arrangement she'd begun with, but the genuine partnership they'd forged through trust and choice. I was thinking about Connor, Sienna admitted. About how different things could have been if I'd made other choices that night. Maya's expression grew serious. Regrets? No, just gratitude, I suppose, for the path that led us here, even the painful parts. Sienna accepted the delicate china cup, breathing in the fragrant steam. Connor saw me as a weapon to use against Ezra. But in trying to destroy us, he gave us the chance to choose each other freely. The moon goddess works in mysterious ways, Maya said sagely. Speaking of which, Alpha Voss asked me to remind you about this afternoon's ceremony. Sienna's hand moved instinctively to her still flat stomach, where their child grew safe and protected beneath her heart. The pregnancy had been confirmed just 2 weeks ago, but already she could feel the subtle changes in her body, the deep contentment that came from carrying the future of their pack. "Is he nervous?" she asked. "Terrified," Maya replied cheerfully. He spent the morning reorganizing his office 3 times and interrogating the security team about perimeter protocols. "I think he's convinced something dire will happen if everything isn't absolutely perfect." The ceremony in question was a blessing ritual, a formal acknowledgement by the moon goddess of their child's place in the pack hierarchy. It was both religious observance and political statement, announcing to the supernatural world that the Northern Territory's future was secure. But more than that, it represented everything Ezra had once feared to want: family, legacy, the vulnerability that came with loving someone more than life itself. "I should go calm him down," Sienna mused, setting aside her tea. "Actually, he's requested that you rest this morning. Apparently, pregnant Lunas require extensive periods of relaxation." Maya's tone was carefully neutral, but her eyes danced with amusement. "He's being overprotective again. He's being Ezra. The man who single-handedly slaughtered 20 wolves to protect you is hardly going to start taking chances now that you're carrying his heir." The reminder of that night still sent chills through Sienna. She'd witnessed her husband's transformation from civilized leader to primal force of nature, seen what he was capable of when pushed beyond his limits. The other alphas in the region had certainly taken note. Challenges to Ezra's territory had ceased entirely after word of Connor's fate spread through the pack networks. No one wanted to test an alpha who could access that level of supernatural fury. But with her, he was unfailingly gentle, protective without being possessive, attentive without being controlling. He'd learned the difference between love and ownership, and that knowledge had made him stronger rather than weaker. "Mrs. Voss?" A young pack member appeared in the doorway, her expression excited. "The Alpha asked me to tell you that the delegation from the Western Territories has arrived early. More visitors." The formal announcement of their pregnancy had drawn representatives from across North America, all eager to curry favor with the growing power of the Northern Territory. Some came bearing gifts, others seeking alliances. All of them recognized that a new era was beginning. "Thank you, Sarah. Tell Alpha Voss I'll be down shortly." After the girl left, Sienna took a moment to study her reflection in the antique mirror that dominated one wall of their bedroom. 6 months ago, she'd been a frightened baker's assistant with no prospects beyond survival. Now she stood in silk and sapphires, her auburn hair styled by the territory's finest esthetician, preparing to receive diplomatic representatives as the acknowledged Luna of one of North America's most powerful packs. But the changes went deeper than surface transformation. There was confidence in her posture now, strength in her gaze that hadn't existed when she'd first signed that cursed contract. She'd found her voice, her power, her place in a world she'd never expected to inhabit. The woman in the mirror looked like someone who belonged here. Second thoughts? Ezra's voice came from behind her, warm with affection and just a hint of concern. She turned to find him standing in their private doorway, having used the connecting passage from his office. He'd changed from his business attire into the formal ceremonial robes that marked him as Alpha. Deep blue silk embroidered with silver thread, ancient symbols that spoke of power and protection. He looked magnificent. And more importantly, he looked happy in a way she'd never seen during their early days together. "No second thoughts," she assured him, moving into his waiting arms. "Just marveling at how much has changed." "Everything," he agreed, his hands settling protectively over her still small bump. "Everything important anyway." The delegation from the Western Territories proved to be led by Alpha Marcus Reed, a distinguished man in his 60s whose territory bordered their own. He'd brought his daughter Rebecca as his representative, a shrewd young woman who would likely inherit his position within the decade. "Alpha Voss, Luna Sienna," Marcus said formally, as they received their guests in the Great Hall. "The Western Territories offer congratulations on your blessed news and hopes for continued cooperation between our peoples." "Your friendship has always been valued, Alpha Reed," Ezra replied with equal formality. "The Northern Territory looks forward to deepening our alliance." It was a dance Sienna had learned well over the past months, The careful choreography of pack politics, where every word carried weight and every gesture sent messages. She'd discovered an unexpected talent for reading between the lines, for understanding the complex web of relationships that governed supernatural society. "Luna Sienna," Rebecca Reed said, approaching with a beautifully wrapped gift. "From our pack's artisans, a blessing bowl for the child, crafted from silver, mined in our territory's oldest deposits." "How thoughtful," Sienna replied, accepting the gift graciously. "Please convey our gratitude to your craftspeople." But as the formal presentations continued, Sienna noticed Ezra growing increasingly tense. His jaw was tight with controlled aggression, his eyes scanning the crowd with predatory alertness. When she caught his gaze, he gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head, a warning she didn't understand. The realization came too late. The attack, when it came, was swift and coordinated, not from the Western delegation, but from Connor's surviving pack members, who had infiltrated the ceremony disguised as servants. Ezra moved faster than human sight could follow, his protective instincts overriding everything else, as silver blades flashed in the afternoon sunlight. But this time, he wasn't alone. The Northern Territory's warriors responded instantly, forming a protective circle around their Alpha and Luna, while engaging the attackers with lethal efficiency. The battle was over in minutes, leaving their enemies dead or fleeing. But the message was clear. Even months later, there were those who saw Ezra's happiness as weakness to exploit. "Are you hurt?" Ezra's hands moved over her frantically, checking for injuries she didn't possess. "I'm fine," Sienna assured him, though her heart was still racing from the sudden violence. "The baby's fine." His relief was palpable, but so was his fury. "Double the security protocols," he ordered James, who had appeared with blood on his clothes and satisfaction in his eyes. "I want background checks on every person who enters our territory." "Already in progress, Alpha." As their guests were escorted to safety and the hall was cleared of debris, Ezra pulled Sienna close against his chest. She could feel the tremor in his powerful frame, the fear he'd experienced at the thought of losing them. "I can't," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "I can't lose you. Either of you." "You won't," she promised, her arms tightening around him. "We're stronger together, remember? They can't touch what we've built." The blessing ceremony took place that evening as planned, though with heightened security that turned the peaceful ritual into something resembling a fortress under siege. But as the moon goddess's silver light bathed them both, blessing the life growing within Sienna's womb, the afternoon's violence seemed distant and unimportant. This was what mattered. Their love, their child, their future together. Later, as they lay entwined in their bed with moonlight streaming through the windows, Sienna traced patterns on Ezra's chest with her fingertips. "No more attacks," she said firmly. "No more challenges or threats or people trying to hurt us. I decree it." His laughter rumbled beneath her ear. "I don't think it works that way, love. Then we'll make it work that way. You're the most feared Alpha in North America, and I'm getting very good at the political game. Between your strength and my diplomacy, we should be able to manage a little peace and quiet. For our child. For our family." She lifted her head to meet his gaze. "All of it, Ezra. The territory, the pack, the people who depend on us. We protect them all. We," he repeated, smiling at the certainty in her voice. "I like the sound of that." As sleep claimed them both, Sienna felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. She'd been bought as payment for a debt, bound by contracts she'd never wanted. But she'd chosen to transform that bondage into something beautiful, a partnership built on love and respect, a future bright with possibility. The baker's assistant was gone forever, replaced by a Luna who would help shape the supernatural world's future. And the man beside her, once afraid to love, now slept peacefully, knowing that his greatest vulnerability had become his greatest strength. Their child stirred gently beneath her heart, already beloved, already protected by the fierce devotion of parents, who had learned that true power came not from dominance, but from the courage to be vulnerable with someone worthy of that trust. In choosing each other, they had chosen everything, and that was exactly as it should be. Sienna and Ezra found their freedom. but countless others remain trapped by forced bonds and loveless contracts. Their stories of rebellion and true love await discovery. If this tale moved you, we have many more supernatural romances where love conquers duty. Subscribe to witness more hearts breaking free from their chains. Thank you for joining us tonight.